Well, hello, and thanks for having me on the show. I'm a great admirer of it. I think probably like a lot of the great journalists that you've mentioned and the other guest you have on the show, Jeremy Scahill, I think I was probably trying to put the Iraq fiasco into a larger context and maybe put it through a different sort of lens and tell a different narrative than I think the corporate narrative that we've been getting about the Iraq war, and explore some of these themes. You know, when we hear these words like privatization, you know, what does that mean? And in the case of the Iraq war, it meant outsourcing what you would imagine to be the very core functions of government, and the very thing that makes you a state, to turn that into a for-profit business. And we've gone so far down the rabbit hole now where actually torture is being outsourced. So it's strange and savage times. So that was really kind of the genesis of it. And there was also a climate where people were telling Americans to watch what they say, and you know, and the hypocrisy, and I think in the stench of lies was so intense, you know, it would make your eyes water. So as a filmmaker and citizen, you think, well, you know, how do you contextualize this? And so that was really why I wanted to make it.
Let's go to another clip of War, Inc., where Brent Hauser confronts the head of the CIA, played by Ben Kingsley.
Every empire is summed up in Rome. The Romans, Hauser, stewards of the human race, torchbearers of culture. You and I, centurions, honor bound to defend civilization against the barbarians.
Let's cut the walk in. I like killing people as much as the next guy, but I signed up to kill the bad ones. Health clinics, trade unionists, journalists, agricultural co-ops, Catholic liberation theologians, impoverished Colombian coffee farmers. These are the barbarians, the depraved opponents of civilization. We turn Central America into a graveyard. Whoever momentarily interrupts the accumulation of our wealth, we pulverize. I'm just not feeling good about that anymore, sir.
Then do what you have to do, son.
Excerpt of War, Inc. Juan.
Well, John Cusack, obviously you're dealing with weighty and tragic situations, but you've chosen satire. Why the satire approach did you feel was necessary?
Well, I think, you know, all satire or absurdism does is take current trends to their logical conclusion, you know, if you follow it a couple weeks or a couple years down the road. And some would argue, I think rightfully so, that we're already there. So, you know, I think at times you have to put a different lens on it in order to kind of process the information, I think. And, you know, there's a great tradition of satire mocking power elites and, you know, whether they be kings or corporate kings, and, you know, shaming them and naming things and calling things what they are.
John Cusack, what about Hollywood in this time of war? Your assessment of your industry?
I don't know. I think that there are individuals out there who are trying to do good work, and so I don't like to lump people into kind of groupthink, I don't like to sort of think that way. You know, obviously it's the industry really wants to make money and protect itself, and I think, like the rest of the country, people have been, I think, kind of zonked spectators, just going along this conveyor belt and not really wanting to face what this particular administration has done to the Constitution and to the very idea of America and democracy. So I think a lot of people are numb and kind of checked out, I think.
Jeremy Scahill, your book Blackwater has had such an important effect, and actually it's as if a part of this film we're watching the sort of what it looks like on film. You wrote a really positive piece about War, Inc. and its importance, especially in the Hollywood commercialized climate we're in today.
Well, first of all, John Cusack is really to be commended for this. He and I have had a dialogue ongoing over the years. It's kind of funny when you talk to a lot of unembedded independent journalists who've been to Iraq. Almost all of us started receiving calls from John Cusack shortly after the invasion of Iraq began. And John was calling people not because he was saying, hey, I'm going to do a movie, but because he wanted to know what was going on. And so he was calling me, he was calling Naomi Klein, he was calling other people who had been in and out of Iraq and was trying to gather information. And, I grew up, one of my favorite films was John's movie Say Anything, and you remember that famous scene where he's standing outside of the home of the woman that he loves, and he's playing Peter Gabriel's song on a boombox above his head. It's one of those sort of iconic moments of film, and certainly from my generation. And now I sort of see John as standing outside the gates of Hollywood with a sort of cheap TV over his head, saying, hey, these are political films about the Iraq War. Do something about it. We have to remember this is the most radically privatized war in the history of this country. I don't think most people in this country around the world can name more than 3 or 4 countries that have an official deployment in Iraq, and yet there are 630 corporations on the U.S. government payroll. And so what John has done here is not some over-the-top film. It's actually more true than fiction in a way. You have journalists in the movie who are embedded inside of the Emerald City, which is sort of John's version of the Green Zone, and they're watching the war in an IMAX theater. And there's a scene where John's character is actually eating popcorn, sitting next to Marissa Tomei's character, who's a sort of progressive journalist who's come there to muckrake. But it's not over the top. It actually is more true than what you read in the pages of the New York Times. And I think that John is really to be commended for doing what is actually not a satire. It's a very powerful commentary on the way things actually are in Iraq right now, and with the U.S. war machine. It's sort of a combination of Clockwork Orange, Wizard of Oz, or a sort of political Muppet show, so to speak, that actually says a lot and has a very stark commentary on the way things are.
And yet, almost predictably, a lot of the commercial media have been panning film, right?
Absolutely. This is sort of the hubris of power journalism. A New York Times reviewer said something like, that satire has to be in the current moment, and that this film was looking backwards. It's sort of implying that this was a moment in time when Paul Bremer was there. No. This is the Cinnabon War. You can go to war with a cappuccino right now. This wasn't something that happened in 2004 for a year. It's on right now. There's recent reporting talking about how troops are now becoming obese because of all of the fast food that's being fed to them inside of the Green Zone and these other heavily fortified areas. This film is a better reportage than a lot of what we see in the corporate media.
And John Cusack, you have some of the biggest stars going in this film. Of course, you yourself, and you've got Marissa Tomei, you've got Hilary Duff, you've got Ben Kingsley, you've got Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah. And all of these artists kind of jumped in and were very gung-ho about doing it. And what's been so kind of pleasing is that many of the people who I deeply respect and admire, and who are courageous journalists and writers and thinkers like Jeremy, whose book has been so influential, and Naomi Klein, whose groundbreaking work is universally recognized, and the list goes on and on, who have knowledge of the situation, have all kind of come to support the film and defend it. And I think it's because since they've been there and they know that this is the prime example of this ideological mission to sort of hollow out the government and privatize it, and privatize everything in sight. And if you want that sort of a world, and I think in Jeremy's book, Eric Prince said he wants to do for the military what FedEx did to the post office. And I believe he said it with a straight face, as if running a for-profit occupation in the Green Zone is nothing more than delivering the mail. If private corporations should be able to defy international law and shred the Constitution and blow up the streets to protect a corporation's interests, and do it all on our dime, if that's the future that we want, that's the future we've got. So if the reviewers say we're looking backwards, I don't know what they think the current state of the world is right now.